So we're going to start today with the Queen. Buckingham Palace now confirming that she will not be attending the state opening of Parliament today. This is for the first time in 60 years, and they describe it as episodic mobility problems, which means that what they're trying to say...
Comes and goes,
not with her all the time.
Yeah, hence why it was a very late call from Buckingham Palace yesterday. Well, instead, Prince Charles and Prince William have jointly been given the authority to open Parliament on her behalf, with the Prince of Wales delivering the speech that lays out the government's legislative agenda.
Joining us now, we've got the royal broadcaster, Rafe Heydel-Mankoo. Rafe, good to see you on this one. Look, what is going to be the new norm from here on in with Her Majesty? We hope she keeps well, but should we be expecting her now at everything she's supposed to attend? What's going to change?
Well, the Royal Household actually announced a couple of months ago that from now on, people should assume that Her Majesty will not be attending events that she was supposed to attend, and decisions will be made on the day. And that was quite a nice way of doing it, because they didn't want people to be disappointed by the Queen not turning up. So if they assume she won't be there and then she does turn up, it is a bonus, as you say.
So, OK, look, let's break this down into little bits. Episodic mobility means it comes and goes, her ability to move. Presumably, and we've heard rumours, not least from Christopher Biggins, who's a friend of the royals, that Her Majesty is now using a wheelchair. Now, we understand discreet inquiries have been made about the use of a wheelchair within the Palace of Westminster. Why wouldn't that have been an option for Her Majesty? Presumably, she could have done that, but she's decided that she'd rather her son and her grandson take the mantle instead.
The Queen isn't quite ready yet to be seen in public using aids, be they walking sticks or wheelchairs. Of course, people remember her mother, the Queen Mother, had 2 walking sticks, but also people remember Princess Margaret, her sister, who was in a wheelchair. I'm sure the time will come when Her Majesty will be happy to be seen in public like that. I'm not surprised at all that she's not attending. I assumed always that would be the case. It's a very tiring day, the state opening of Parliament. There's a lot of walking involved, and it finishes with having to ascend several stairs to the throne.
Crown, she wears the crown.
Well, she hasn't worn the crown on her last occasion, and I think that would be too much to expect her to have the heavy robes and the crown.
You know, it's interesting, any of you watching or listening today, my mother is 93, and she wouldn't be seen in public. I often say to her, Mum, why don't you get a wheelchair? Why don't you get a stick? Why don't you do this, that? And she'll say, I'm not being seen like an old person. I said, but Mum, you are an old person. And so it is obvious, and when you're under that scrutiny, there's a certain amount of dignity and pride that you have, and an image to maintain.
That's precisely it. And that's why, for example, during the Platinum Jubilee, when they have the service of Thanksgiving, the Queen will be entering through a side door rather than processing down the great sweep of the nave, as she would have done before, so that she'll be seated, and as they've said, to maintain her dignity. In fact, you know, it's not the first time this has happened. Queen Victoria was too old for her Diamond Jubilee to go up the steps of St Paul's, so she was in a carriage outside for the service.
Yeah, I mean, we should point out there'll be people watching in wheelchairs who'll be saying, well, hang on a minute, what's wrong with being seen in a wheelchair? There's nothing undignified about that.
They're not the Queen.
They're not the Queen, but I think it would send a really strong, positive message if she were to do that, and we'd all be very supportive, I'm sure. But just describe to us what we can expect to see then from Prince Charles. Presumably he won't be wearing a crown either, because he's not the monarch. But I was seeing Robert Hardman, the royal biographer, on the front of the Daily Mail this morning, talking about the start of a Charles regency, and effectively we're beginning to see that, aren't we?
Yes, this is a major step. So this is the third time that the Queen hasn't opened Parliament. 59 years ago was the last time, 1959 and 1963 for the births of Prince Andrew and Prince Edward. And so it's on those last 2 occasions, it was the Lord Chancellor who actually read the speech. So Dominic Raab won't be doing it. It will be the Prince of Wales with Prince William as a Councillor of State. And the Councillors of State act when the sovereign is incapacitated.
It's a great apprenticeship for William.
It's a great apprenticeship. And, of course, Prince Charles has had that apprenticeship too by sitting next to his mother for the last few years. So he's been with her for the speech for a few years, in one way anticipating this day would come eventually. And now it has come. And it is a big step up for him. And, yes, as you say, I think it won't be an official regency, but he'll be taking over much more of her roles.
Now, Isabel raised a very good point with the Jubilee ahead and things like Ascot or the Derby. The Queen's got no runners in the Derby, so sort of less reason to be there. Will these sort of events be casualties, these more social events?
Well, I think if Her Majesty has the choice, she'll go to Ascot and the Derby over her own service of Thanksgiving even. So I would think those would be the last two that she would want to see, especially in her Platinum Jubilee year. And of course, it's a very different state of affairs when it comes to those events, because you can easily come into those events in a wheelchair without anyone seeing you. So you may not actually have the full carriage procession that you have at Royal Ascot, perhaps. Yes. That might be a casualty, but I think Her Majesty will certainly be there.
Right, OK. Very
just in terms of the state opening of Parliament, and we talk about the opening of Parliament, people at home, we think, oh, Parliament's already open, mid-term. What's all the formality of it? Just to explain some of the sort of constitutional moments that we're seeing today and some of the rituals that we'll be witnessing, because it's a very ancient tradition, isn't it?
So it goes back hundreds of years, although in its current form it dates from the opening of the new Houses of Parliament after the Great Fire. So it was 1852 that the current ceremony that we're seeing actually started. But the state opening is essentially a new session of Parliament is beginning. So on April the 28th, the last Parliament was prorogued, and now we have the new Parliament coming in. And it's the one time that you have all three elements of Parliament together: the Sovereign, the Lords and the Commons. And they all coincide on this event. You have the Queen's speech that's read, which lays out the government's agenda for the year ahead. It's a very important affair.
And how much is the Queen briefed ahead of this? You know, obviously, it's very much the government's laws that she'll be reading out. I mean, she doesn't have any say, obviously, and hasn't done for a long time. It's a sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? The position she holds is a sort of...
It's a ceremonial function.
Ceremonial function, yeah. But would she, you know, perhaps change some of the language, or, you know, and how often in the past have we seen her reading things that we suspect she's not wanted to read out?
Yes, well... we know it's called the Queen's speech, but it's the government speech. The only speech that's really her speech is the Christmas Day message. That's one that she takes an active role in. It's written exclusively within the royal household. Essentially, she has to read what she's given. You know, she'll practice it beforehand, but you're not going to see.
But she wouldn't be rewriting or anything.
No, there'll be no rewriting done with that. We do know, for example, when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, the Queen wasn't entirely happy with all of Margaret Thatcher's policies, and so I'm sure there have been many occasions when her eyebrows were raised. But Her Majesty is a paragon of discretion, and I don't think we would ever be privy to those in the concerns she might have had.
Mm-hmm. At what stage do you think we will be given a realistic appraisal of Her Majesty's health? Episodic, what do they call mobility problems? Yeah. Why doesn't someone just say she's got a bad knee, or her hips are gone, or whatever?
There's always been this cloak of secrecy surrounding the health of the Queen. If you remember earlier this year when she went to hospital, they didn't even they kept flying the Royal Standard over Windsor Castle, even though she wasn't there, because they didn't want people to know she'd gone to hospital. It's a delicate balance. Everyone is entitled to privacy about their own personal health, and yet there is a public right to know about the Sovereign, of course. And so how do you strike that balance? But yes, I think being more forthcoming, because otherwise it just leads to speculation and people automatically assume the worst.
Yeah, OK. Rafe, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, he's a royal broadcaster, he's a royal commentator as well. He knows his stuff, and maybe we'll talk to you later in the programme as well. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.